a New Mexico teacher vanishes without a trace.
The newspapers are stacked up and untouched.
They saw the dogs were barricaded with an overflowing bowl of food.
I'm very worried. Like, this is Twilight Zone creepy to me.
A family member's history of violence puts them at the top of a short list of suspects.
He had threatened her with a knife, and she ended up calling the police.
I used to always tell her she was a victim of abuse, domestic violence, only by a child.
But the investigation reveals a more complex and disturbing plot involving fraud, a polyamorous relationship, and a woman determined to get revenge.
She pulled a lot of people into this situation to fulfill her agenda.
All they saw her as was money and a nuisance.
She flew into a rage and she snapped.
May 6, 2009. It's a warm spring afternoon in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when authorities receive an emergency call from a teacher named Cathleen Frost. Catherine says she's at the home of a coworker, 61-year-old Ellen Roth, and she's worried something has happened to her.
Ellen had not come to work for a couple of days, and this was very out of character for her.
Ellen was always at work on time, snow, rain, whatever it may be. She's not one to just disappear.
Catherine heard dogs barking but didn't see any sign of life and was concerned and asked for a welfare check to be done.
The Albuquerque Police Department is sent to assess the situation.
When police arrive, the officer notices that the newspapers are stacked up and untouched. And Ms. Frost tells them she fears Ellen may have hurt herself.
Catherine was aware of a prior incident that Ellen had had where she allegedly fell out of bed and hurt herself seriously.
With her falling inside the residence and her not answering the phone, he made the determination that they needed to force entry into the house.
Despite Catherine's concern, they don't find Ellen or any indication she's in danger.
There were no signs of forced entry. There wasn't anything to suggest that there had been some type of a struggle inside the residence. They did notice that there were two canines that were inside the residence. The animals did have water and a large amount of food that was had been placed in the food bowls.
But according to Catherine, the dogs are proof something is wrong.
Catherine saying she would never have left her dogs. This is not how she treated her dogs. The food bowl wouldn't be overflowing. It almost looked as though somebody had put the dogs in there knowing that it would be days before they would be found. That was a real red flag for them.
Detectives think, who could have hurt Ellen, or what could have happened to Ellen if she disappeared?
Detectives are concerned as to her whereabouts, and we owed it to the community and her family to find her. Her disappearance was out of character of her, so detectives started doing a deep dive into Ellen's background.
Ellen Feeder was born April 15, 1948, to Emmanuel and Judith Feeder. She was one of 4 children, but the only girl.
My sister was born in Miami, and then my family moved to Albuquerque. My dad was stationed there. He was a second lieutenant, and he was in the Air Force.
In her younger years, Ellen was a very outgoing person, and she had this appetite for education.
Ellen definitely wanted to go to college. She chose the University of Miami, which was ironic because she was born there. And she started taking classes in education.
She really liked children, so she enjoyed teaching more, I think, than she thought she would.
After her undergraduate program, Ellen returned to Albuquerque, where she obtained a master's degree in bilingual education and began her teaching career.
She just loved watching kids grow, teaching them. And then the kids would always come back to visit her, so she felt very well accomplished.
When Ellen wasn't teaching, she was out exploring the world.
Ellen was very outgoing. She had a lot of friends. She traveled pretty much every summer.
She had gone all over the world. She would tell us stories about her travels. She was very well-versed.
But there was one thing Ellen seemed to want more than anything else.
One of Ellen's goals in life, maybe you could say the major goal in life, was to be a mother.
In Albuquerque, she dated people, but just never found that Mr. Right. She's in her 30s now and really wanted to settle down and start a family.
Finally, in 1986, Ellen believed she found the man she'd been looking for when she met Jerry Roth.
Jerry was a very successful lawyer. He made a lot of money. He seemed to love Ellen and, and took care of Ellen.
Just a year after they started dating, Ellen and Jerry got married. But having children of her own proved to be more difficult than she'd hoped.
She tried to have children for many years. I don't believe she could ever get pregnant.
She decided to go the next step. She talked to Jerry about possibly adopting a child. I know at first he was not interested, but over time he decided that he would go along with that.
In 1990, the Roths adopted a newborn son and named him Brian.
When she brought Brian home, she was extremely happy. She felt complete.
She loved being a mother. She lived for Brian.
Unfortunately, the marriage began to suffer soon afterward.
Ellen was so wrapped up with Brian, I think she maybe forgot about her relationship with her husband.
Less than a year after they adopt Brian, her husband decides to divorce her.
I don't believe she was upset about the divorce. Jerry gave her full custody of Brian, and so she was thrilled about that.
Raising a son all on her own wasn't easy. But by 2009, Ellen was relaxing into her golden years, excited to see her son building his own future. Brian had married a young woman named Cathleen and appeared to be settling down.
At this point, Ellen is pretty content with the situation that Brian is starting his adult life. So she's in her 60s and she's looking towards retirement.
With her life seemingly going so well, Ellen's sudden disappearance is difficult for anyone to explain.
Police contact Ellen's brother, John Feeder, and he also reiterates that this is out of the ordinary, so he goes to the apartment.
John notices something strange.
He proceeds to tell them that her 2007 Dodge Caravan is missing.
This just further is another piece of the puzzle that leads them to conclude that they need to continue their investigation. They need to do it as quickly as possible.
Coming up, a shocking accusation.
He fears that her son may have something to do with it because of the abusive relationship they have.
But investigators find the case more complicated than they imagined.
She was a very, very deep sleeper, so it's easy for them to get into the house. They were waiting for her.
After confirming that no one has seen his sister Ellen Roth in days, John Feeder officially reports her missing with Albuquerque police.
Her minivan is entered into the system, and Ellen is entered as a missing person in NCIC.
John tells detectives that if something has happened to Ellen, one suspect immediately springs to mind.
He fears that her son Brian may have something to do with it.
According to John, 19-year-old Brian has a long history of serious behavioral issues.
I know that Brian had a lot of issues, but she tried to meet the challenges as best she could.
And as much as he's acting out and difficult, all Ellen knows is to show him love.
John says that approach didn't work. Brian began abusing drugs and became more confrontational with his mother.
It starts to get so bad that Ellen sends him to New Day, which is a recovery center here in Albuquerque. In a sense, Ellen has to do tough love finally and kick him out.
It's there that Brian met his future wife, 21-year-old fellow patient Cathleen Kit Nielsen.
They form this strong bond because they feel they have so much in common with their growing pains with both of their family lives.
Kit and Brian definitely bonded over that sense of being felt very unwanted. He had felt his entire life that Ellen adopted me as a prop. She's this very wealthy woman. She's made my life so miserable. Kit didn't talk a lot about her family background. It was clearly something very painful for her.
Though finding a kindred spirit in Kathleen initially seemed to bring Brian peace of mind, he eventually fell back into his old ways.
Detectives found out that he had been arrested on March 25th of 2009 for a domestic violence episode with Ellen Roth. He had threatened her with a knife, and she ended up calling the police. He was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Police records show Brian was sentenced to a year of probation, but less than 2 weeks before her disappearance, Ellen filed another report against him.
On the 26th of April, she checked her bank account and realized that there were some charges that she did not make. She realized that her debit card had been missing.
Along with the card, she realizes that 2 diamond rings, a wedding band, and a dinner ring, and 3 necklaces are also missing from her residence. She suspects it's Brian. He had access to the house.
Prior to Ellen calling police, she did some investigating on her own. She calls the bank to see where the purchases were made. The bank tells her that the unauthorized purchases were at Walmart, a tobacco shop, and 7-Eleven.
Ellen actually calls the tobacco shop and speaks to one of the employees.
The clerk is able to describe Brian's appearance. The credit card and Brian's ID both have the last name. And Brian tells the clerk that his mother gave him permission to use her credit card.
The fact that Ellen disappeared 4 days after making this new complaint against her son raises detectives' suspicions.
Where was Brian during the time that Ellen was missing? Could he have been involved in her disappearance? Obviously, at this point, you've got one suspect. It's Brian Roth.
But Brian's parole officer cast doubt on his involvement.
Brian Roth had been arrested on May 1st of 2009 for a probation violation. They did test him for any type of narcotics. He did come back with a dirty sample. So at that time, the probation officer revoked Brian's probation, and he was then placed into custody.
With Brian being incarcerated from May 1st on, there was no way he could have anything physically to do with this.
So detectives have to look at the case again. What happened if Brian isn't a factor anymore?
4 days into their search, police get a break in the case.
On May 10th of 2009, a telephone call came into the Albuquerque Police Department to report that a vehicle had been located. The caller thought that the vehicle was probably stolen.
Law enforcement responds that it matches the description of Ellen Roth's car, but the license plate on the back of the vehicle does not match the stolen license plate.
The officer then decided to look at the VIN number. That VIN number then came back to the registered owner, which is Ellen Roth.
The location of the vehicle provides investigators with a possible clue.
Ellen was somewhat of a recluse. She would go to work at the school, and then she would go home. So the van being in this part of the town was very uncommon.
She lived in the northeast part of Albuquerque. For her vehicle to be in the International District just did not make sense. Was she abducted from this location? Was this just a dumping ground for the vehicle? We're looking for any type of trace evidence, any type of DNA, blood, fibers, but detectives noticed that it appeared to have been freshly wiped down. Could have been somebody that actually put her in harm's way and then trying to destroy evidence.
A check of Ellen's phone and bank records sets off even more alarm bells.
Her phone had not been used, and her debit cards, credit cards, nothing had occurred at all since the time she's missing. So it seems that she just fell off the face of the earth.
It's now been a week since anyone saw Ellen Roth, and with no financial activity or ransom demands, investigators increasingly believe there's only one reason why.
They have a missing woman who's married to routine, who's reliable, who's missed work, has never missed work before. Her dogs aren't well cared for. Her car is found in a strange location and it's wiped clean. They're dealing with a homicide. She's been killed. They don't know who did it. They don't know why or how at this point.
Ellen Roth vanished a week ago, and the limited evidence recovered by police is raising major red flags.
It's not looking good that Ellen is alive at this point. Her credit cards haven't been used, her telephone hasn't been used, so there's only one thing to surmise. On May 11th, this case went from a missing persons case into a homicide case.
Detectives have to look at who may be the closest person to Ellen, who may have had knowledge of her disappearance, or who may have done something to her. And that person happens to be Brian Roth.
Just because he was in jail at the time of Ellen's disappearance doesn't mean that he couldn't have orchestrated something.
On May 11th, investigators pay Brian a visit at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Albuquerque.
And he comes across to detectives as very concerned. He does tell the detectives that he and his mom didn't have the best relationship. Maybe they butted heads more than once, but he would never wish her harm.
Brian says it's likely his mother had some kind of accident because it's happened before.
Brian went on to tell us about an incident that happened with his mother, Ellen. She had taken her sleeping pills. She'd taken an extra one that night and then somehow fallen out of bed in the middle of the night. When she hit the floor, a lamp fell off the table and struck her in the head.
She bled pretty well on the side of her bed.
Kathleen and Brian went over to Ellen's house to help clean.
Brian says that was the night of April 25th, and it was also the last time he saw his mother. Police questioned the accuracy of his story, since Ellen reported him for stealing her credit cards and jewelry shortly thereafter.
I believe he kind of brushes that off as saying his mother gave him a ring for Kathleen. They walked away from that interview knowing that Brian couldn't have done the act, but he still might be involved in one way or the other.
That same afternoon, investigators bring in 21-year-old Cathleen Roth to hear what she has to say.
She appeared to be concerned for the safety of her mother-in-law and wanted to provide as much information as she could.
And this all seems unusual to you?
Oh, this is like Twilight Zone creepy to me.
Kathleen corroborated what Brian's statements were about Ellen getting injured around the 25th. After the blood was cleaned up, Ellen gave the credit card and told him, go buy something.
I will admit, Brian went a bit overboard. We both did. We went to see her the following day on Sunday, apologized, said, like, I'm really sorry. Here's, the receipts.
According to Kathleen, the situation seemed to be resolved.
It isn't until later on that week, until either Thursday or Friday, that she puts a police report out. And rather than both of us getting arrested, only he got arrested. This was just kind of Ellen's little power play to kind of control him. It's not the first time she's done it. Usually she cools down after, drops the charges, forgets that it ever happened. This time she was really upset.
Kathleen reported a phone call that she had with Ellen around May 1st. Catherine questioned why she only reported Brian as having any involvement with the credit cards.
She just goes off, you stole from me, you stole my jewelry. She starts accusing me of all these things. I tell her, I'm Ellen, I have no idea what you're talking about. You need to calm down,
And that was the last time you talked to her?
That was the last time I spoke to her, yes.
They ask if they can search her apartment, and she willingly lets them. A search is conducted and nothing is found.
At this point, we can't avoid the fact that Brian was in jail. Kathleen doesn't appear to have anything to do with this. We can't avoid the fact that somebody else might have done it, and we're running out of leads at this time. We need to regroup and start again. We need to re-interview everybody that we've interviewed already and see if they have anything else to tell us.
Coming up, investigators learn the details of a complicated marriage.
It's an open, polyamorous relationship.
And an informant breaks the case wide open.
He told me something along the lines of, oh, well, they made somebody disappear.
After speaking with Brian Roth's wife, Kathleen, and confirming he was in jail when his mother vanished, Albuquerque police find themselves in search of new leads to explain Ellen Roth's disappearance and suspected murder.
Detectives interviewed Catherine Frost again. She, again, was a coworker and the one who initially called the police.
According to Catherine, Ellen didn't have any enemies. Apparently, the only source of trouble in her life was her son Brian.
When did the trouble start?
Oh, God. Since he was a little kid, he has called her every filthy name in the book. I used to always tell her she was a victim of abuse, domestic violence, only by a child.
Detectives also learned something concerning about Cathleen from Ellen's sister-in-law.
They learn of a phone call between Ellen and Cathleen. This was after Ellen supposedly fell out of the bed. Ellen's sister-in-law happened to be visiting at the time.
This is the same May 1st phone call that Cathleen admitted to making after Brian's arrest for credit card theft. But the way Ellen's sister-in-law describes it is quite different.
She overheard Cathleen being aggressive towards Ellen.
Cathleen was upset and blamed Ellen for Brian being in jail. The fact that she reports Cathleen had one attitude and Cathleen reports that she had another attitude in her statement to law enforcement indicates there's something to be suspicious of.
In an effort to discover what else Cathleen might be lying to them about, detectives review Brian's phone calls from jail. One call from May 1st immediately jumps out to investigators.
He's telling Cathleen, take everything out of the apartment that we stole, the credit card, everything. And Cathleen tells him, I'm on it.
This explains why police found no evidence related to the theft when they searched Brian and Kathleen's apartment 10 days later. And it's not the only revelation in that brief jailhouse phone call.
Cathleen is trying to calm him down, and she explains to him that she is at Bella's house.
Brian asks her to tell Bella, an unknown person at this point, that he loves her, which raises questions, and it's odd that a man would tell his wife that he loves another woman.
On May 28th, 3 weeks after Ellen was last seen alive, detectives confront Cathleen with the new information they gleaned from the phone call.
She did finally admit that she did steal the credit card and that it wasn't given to her as she originally advised.
Cathleen has told us these credit cards were given to her to use. Now she's saying she's taken it. So she's establishing a pattern of not being honest and truthful with the detectives.
When detectives ask her to tell them about Bella, her answer is more surprising.
Cathleen tells detectives that Brian was actually dating Bella Gonzalez. She is Brian's girlfriend.
What's the deal with that?
It's an open polyamorous relationship.
So is your marriage an arrangement, or you actually love each other?
Both.
Both her and Brian, they see other people.
It was essentially a marriage of convenience so that they could get insurance, food stamps, and government subsidies.
They were both obviously very open about their dating other people. But yeah, there was meaning to them behind this marriage. They were always going to be there for each other.
Cathleen also admits she and Brian were using Ellen for financial gain.
Our relationship with her wasn't a very ethical one. Like, we would see her and she would help us out with gas, help us out with various bills.
Your relationship with her is mostly because of the money.
A lot, yeah.
The change in Kathleen's statement raises further red flags. But investigators don't want to make an arrest too soon.
They decide to let her go because detectives want to see what else Cathleen will do in hopes that she can possibly lead them to where Ellen is.
Time has passed and we still don't know where Ellen is. We don't know if she's alive. We don't know if she's being held captive somewhere. We have no idea where she's at. Brian and Kathleen at this point in the investigation were still persons of interest because there were certain things that we wanted to still figure out.
Kathleen doesn't make any suspicious moves, but on September 1st, 4 months after Ellen disappeared, police finally get the break they've been looking for from an unexpected source.
He walks into the Edgewood Police Department. He says he has information about the missing Albuquerque schoolteacher.
Four months after the disappearance of Ellen Roth, a new witness has come forward claiming to have crucial information. The anonymous informant says he has been wrestling with the decision to come forward with what he knows.
He knew of a person by the name of Christopher Donovan, that he was responsible for the teacher in Albuquerque going missing.
He was just kind of bragging about it, you know?
Okay.
It was his friend, Brian, it was his mom. She was a very, very deep sleeper, so it was easy for them to get into the house. They were waiting for her in the garage, like the following morning.
Donovan told him a male named James Johnson choked her until she was dead.
Chris was talking about, like dead weight. He was like, oh, for those to carry that much dead weight was, you know, it's a pain, basically.
When detectives ask why Christopher Donovan and James Johnson would want to kill Ellen Roth, the informant says James is Cathleen Roth's boyfriend.
This is surprising to detectives because when asked about their open marriage, Kathleen tells detectives about Brian and Bella, but she doesn't mention anything about having a boyfriend.
Law enforcement has this statement. It's deemed credible. So now law enforcement has to go out and corroborate.
If you were in my shoes, who would you approach first? Who do you think would give the story up first, out of their personalities?
I would just say Chris.
Police learn Chris Donovan is an airman stationed at nearby Kirkland Air Force Base. They bring him in for questioning, and he confirms what their informant told them.
According to Chris Donovan, James Johnson is his roommate. He is also Kathleen Roth's boyfriend. He met them about a year prior. He just started talking about the murder and how they did it. It's like he expected us to ask him, and he was ready to tell us.
Why did you help Kit and James?
I don't even know. I guess I just kind of did. I wasn't there. I was not there for the actual murder of Ellen Roth. Who choked her? I believe it was James.
Christopher advises that he was the driver, and so he dropped off both James and Kathleen to the residence of Ellen's.
Chris says he met back up with them later that day, and they told him what they'd done.
Kathleen has a garage door opener that she was given by Ellen. Kathleen and James Johnson wait in the garage for Ellen to leave for work that morning. They grab her, and James chokes her to death. Then they wrap her body, put it in her van, and text Donovan that the deed has been done.
He assisted them in moving Ellen's body. They then drive out to Jemez, a remote area in the Jemez Mountains. And Christopher notices that there is already a pre-dug hole. where they place Ellen into that hole.
She was stoked, I think, more that James actually did it, and she was going out with him, you know?
So she was proud of going out with a guy that just murdered.
Proud that she could get somebody to kidnap her.
Maybe. All they saw her as was money and a nuisance, I'm pretty sure.
So she was just trash they got rid of. Is that fair?
I think so. I think that's kind of fair to say.
At the end of the interview with Chris Donovan, he was arrested on a warrant for first-degree murder, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. All three players, James Johnson, Chris Donovan, and Cathleen Roth, all know what's going on, all participated in it. They are all co-conspirators in this situation.
Perhaps hoping for leniency, Chris agrees to call James and Kathleen to talk about the crime.
The first phone calls are to Cathleen Roth. He basically says, I'm scared. I think they're on to me. And Kathleen responds, don't tell him anything.
You do realize that they're probably monitoring these phone conversations, right? They're following you. Seriously, hang up the phone. I will see you tomorrow.
Donovan's telephone calls to James Johnson are much more fruitful.
Hey, James, you don't think Ellen's stinking, do you?
Maybe, but it's been raining ever since you hear that smell away. And even then, any evidence is probably decayed by now or is gone.
It's enough for investigators to obtain arrest warrants for James Johnson and Cathleen Roth. Johnson is arrested on September 24, 2009. Kathleen is taken into custody the following day. There is still one crucial element missing from the case, however.
Locating Ellen's body, that was the most important piece of evidence.
They didn't have the body, so they couldn't delve into, what actually caused her death.
It is incredibly hard to find somebody in the desert if you have nowhere to start.
Cathleen Roth, her boyfriend James Johnson, and Chris Donovan have been arrested for the murder of 61-year-old Ellen Roth. But prosecutors know without a body, it will be a difficult case to convict.
James Johnson did not want to talk to us. He did not give a statement or anything.
Kathleen, right away, she invokes her right and does not want to speak to authorities.
Since Kathleen stood to profit from her mother-in-law staying alive, motive is also an issue. But it becomes clearer when Brian's girlfriend, Bella Gonzalez, agrees to talk to investigators.
According to Bella, when Brian was arrested, Kathleen flew into a rage and she snapped because she felt Ellen was taking Brian away from her.
She got this very strong sense of not just injustice in the world, but injustice directly kind of pointed at her.
She thought that she needed to do something about it to avenge her husband and decided to take it upon herself to be the mastermind.
She wasn't going to let Ellen have the last word. She pulled a lot of people into this situation to fulfill her agenda.
With Bella's statement, prosecutors feel confident they'll be able to convict Kathleen as the puppet master. But the case never makes it to trial. Instead, Kathleen decides to come clean.
Basically, Kathleen says, all right, I was there, I didn't do it, I just helped move the body.
She actually did believe that because she didn't place her hands around Ellen's neck, that she was not responsible for her death.
As part of her confession, Cathleen agrees to lead investigators to where Ellen's body is buried.
Several detectives caravan to the Jemez Mountains, went to a remote location. Approximately 2 feet was dug and a blue tarp was being exposed from the hole. They contacted the Office of the Medical Investigator to retrieve Ellen Roth's body.
Nearly 5 months after her disappearance, Ellen's killers are brought to justice.
Christopher Donovan pled guilty to second-degree homicide, and he received up to a 15-year sentence.
James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, conspiracy to tampering with evidence, and received 28 years in prison. Cathleen Roth pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, conspiracy for tampering with evidence, and she received 37.5 years in prison.
Brian wasn't charged. The people involved indicated that he was unaware of what happened, and he was in jail at the time the homicide occurred.
I do not believe the perpetrators got what they deserved. Why should they get a chance to live when Ellen doesn't get that chance?
There's a bunch of kids that relied on this person, Ellen, their mother figure, and they decided to kill her for really nothing but their insecurities. That's what disturbs me about this.
We never saw something like this happening. How could this happen to us? One of my daughters named her first daughter using Ellen's first name. Her life will always live on, and the memories will live on because we'll pass that on the best we can.
The pursuit of justice is often a journey through the darkest corridors of human nature, revealing how easily trust can be dismantled and how deeply entitlement can fester within the boundaries of a family. In the quiet neighborhoods of Albuquerque, New Mexico, the tragic disappearance of Ellen Roth in the year 2009 serves as a profound and sobering case study. It exposes not only the vulnerabilities of those who dedicate their lives to nurturing the future of others, but also the absolute folly of those who believe they can escape the consequences of their actions through deceit and manipulation. The story of Ellen Roth, a beloved bilingual education teacher, is one of immense devotion met with a chilling lack of empathy. By examining the intricate details of this investigation, the psychological motives of her exploiters, and the methodical work of the Albuquerque Police Department, we can draw vital lessons for community awareness, the prevention of domestic elder abuse, and the appreciation of the tireless efforts of law enforcement to honor the truth. To understand the tragedy, one must first appreciate the life of Ellen Feeder, who was born on April 15, 1948, to Emmanuel and Judith Feeder. As the only girl among 4 children, Ellen grew up in a supportive household, eventually moving to Albuquerque, where her father served as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. From her youth, Ellen possessed an insatiable appetite for education and a natural affinity for children. She pursued her undergraduate degree at the University of Miami, returning to Albuquerque to earn a master's degree in bilingual education. For decades, she poured her heart into her teaching career, finding immense fulfillment in watching her students grow and succeed. Beyond the classroom, Ellen was an outgoing and adventurous soul who traveled the world, sharing stories of her journeys with friends and family. Yet, her ultimate goal in life was to experience the joy of motherhood. In the year 1986, she married Jerry Roth, and when biological path to parenthood proved challenging, they made the decision to adopt. In the year 1990, they brought home a newborn son whom they named Brian, a moment that Ellen described as completing her life. However, the domestic harmony she envisioned was short-lived. Following her divorce from Jerry, Ellen took on the responsibility of raising Brian as a single mother, dedicating her resources and affection to his upbringing. As Brian grew, he began to exhibit severe behavioral challenges, turning to substance abuse and demonstrating increasingly confrontational attitude toward his mother. Despite her attempts to provide stability, the situation escalated, eventually forcing Ellen to seek assistance from local recovery centers and, ultimately, to utilize tough love by asking him to leave her home. It was during his time at a recovery center that Brian met Kathleen Kit Nielsen, a fellow resident who shared a similar background of feeling alienated from her family. The two bonded deeply over their shared grievances, with Brian harboring a toxic belief that his mother had adopted him merely as a prop. This shared resentment laid the foundation for a highly manipulative dynamic, where Ellen was viewed not as a mother who had sacrificed for her son, but rather as an obstacle and a source of financial support to be exploited. The psychological motives behind such crimes often stem from a destructive blend of entitlement, codependency, and external manipulation. In many cases of domestic elder abuse and violence by adult children, the perpetrator develops a warped perception that they are the true victims, justifying their exploitative behavior as a form of retribution. Brian and Kathleen viewed Ellen through a lens of utility, seeking her assistance for basic needs while simultaneously harboring deep resentment for her attempts to establish boundaries. This toxic environment escalated dramatically on March 25, 2009, when Brian was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon after threatening his mother with a knife. Though Ellen sought the protection of the law, the cycle of abuse continued. On April 26, 2009, she discovered that her debit card was missing and that her bank account had been compromised with unauthorized charges at local businesses, including a Walmart, a tobacco shop, and a 7-Eleven store. Additionally, valuable jewelry, including her wedding band and necklaces, had been stolen from her residence. Ellen displayed remarkable resilience by conducting her own inquiries, contacting the businesses where her card had been used, and confirming that Brian was indeed the individual responsible. Despite the emotional toll, she reported the theft to the police, an act of self-preservation that unfortunately triggered an explosive reaction within her son's social circle. The frequency of such cases in society highlights a critical loophole in how communities handle domestic escalation. Often, minor infractions and verbal abuse are dismissed as private family matters, allowing the hostility to build until it reaches a catastrophic threshold. For Kathleen, Ellen's decision to hold Brian accountable was viewed not as a lawful consequence of his actions, but as a direct threat to her own stability. When Brian was subsequently incarcerated on May 1, 2009, for a probation violation stemming from a positive narcotics test, Kathleen experienced a wave of resentment, blaming Ellen entirely for his detention and resolving to take matters into her own hands. The investigation into Ellen's disappearance began on May 6, 2009, when her colleague, Cathleen Roth, contacted the Albuquerque Police Department to request a welfare check. Ellen, known for her absolute reliability and dedication, had failed to report to work for several days, an unprecedented deviation from her character. Upon arriving at the residence, officers noted several immediate red flags. The newspapers were stacked untouched on the porch, and her dogs had been barricaded inside with an overflowing bowl of food and water. This detail was particularly telling to those who knew Ellen, as she was deeply devoted to her pets and would never have left them in such a state. Recognizing that these circumstances suggested potential harm, officers forced entry into the home. Although they found no signs of a struggle or forced entry, the suspicious arrangement of the pet food indicated that someone had prepared the residence for a prolonged absence, raising fears that Ellen had met with foul play. When her brother, John Feeder, arrived at the home, he discovered that her 2007 Dodge Caravan was missing, adding another critical piece to the puzzle. The Albuquerque Police Department immediately entered Ellen's name and vehicle details into the National Crime Information Center database, beginning an intensive search. From the outset, detectives faced a complex challenge. While Brian's history of domestic violence made him the primary suspect, his incarceration on May 1, 2009, provided him with an absolute physical alibi for the dates surrounding her disappearance. This forced investigators to look beyond the obvious and examine the wider web of relationships surrounding the family, eventually focusing on Brian's young wife, Cathleen. On May 10, 2009, a significant breakthrough occurred when a caller reported an abandoned vehicle matching the description of Ellen's minivan in the International District of Albuquerque. This location was entirely out of character for Ellen, who was known to lead a routine life centered around her home and school. Upon inspecting the vehicle, officers discovered that the license plate had been switched and the interior had been meticulously wiped clean of any physical evidence, such as fingerprints or biological material. This deliberate effort to destroy evidence confirmed the fears of the detectives, transitioning the missing persons case into a dedicated homicide investigation. On May 11, 2009, during initial interviews, Cathleen maintained an air of concern, portraying her mother-in-law as a controlling figure who used police reports as a means of exerting power over Brian. She claimed that Ellen had given them the credit cards and jewelry voluntarily, only to change her mind and file a false report. Cathleen also detailed a narrative where Ellen had allegedly fallen out of bed on April 25, 2009, resulting in a head injury that she and Brian had helped clean up. This explanation was carefully designed to account for any potential biological evidence that might be discovered within the home, demonstrating a calculated level of sophistication. However, detectives remained skeptical, utilizing systematic communication monitoring to uncover the truth. The critical turning point in the investigation came through the analysis of recorded phone calls made by Brian from the detention facility. On May 1, 2009, the very day of his arrest, Brian instructed Cathleen to remove all stolen items, including the compromised credit cards, from their apartment. Cathleen assured him that she was already managing the situation from a location she referred to as Bella House. In this conversation, Brian also requested that Cathleen convey his affection to Bella, revealing a highly unconventional domestic arrangement. When confronted with this information on May 28, 2009, Cathleen admitted to the credit card theft and disclosed that she and Brian were in an open, polyamorous relationship involving a girlfriend named Bella Gonzalez. She further conceded that her marriage to Brian was largely a matter of convenience to secure government assistance, and that their relationship with Ellen was motivated primarily by financial gain. Despite these revelations, detectives demonstrated strategic patience, choosing not to make an immediate arrest. This restraint allowed them to monitor Kathleen's actions in the hope that she might inadvertently lead them to Ellen's location. For several months, the case remained at a standstill until September 1st, 2009, when an anonymous informant entered the Edgewood Police Department with information that would crack the case wide open. The informant stated that an individual named Christopher Donovan had admitted to involvement in the teacher disappearance, and that a man named James Johnson had taken her life. Crucially, the informant revealed that James Johnson was Kathleen's boyfriend, a relationship that Kathleen had deliberately concealed during her previous interviews. Law enforcement moved swiftly to corroborate this information, locating Christopher Donovan, an airman stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base. Faced with questioning, Donovan confessed to his role in the conspiracy, revealing a disturbing level of premeditation. He explained that Kathleen had orchestrated the plot to avenge Brian's arrest, viewing Ellen as a nuisance who needed to be eliminated. Using a garage door opener provided by Ellen, Kathleen and James Johnson had gained access to her home, waiting in the garage to ambush her as she left for work. James Johnson then took her life, after which they transported her body in her own minivan to a remote pre-dug location in the Jemez Mountains. Donovan admitted to assisting with the transportation and burial, describing how Kathleen appeared proud of the deed, viewing Ellen merely as an obstacle that had been successfully removed. To secure the necessary evidence for prosecution, investigators directed Donovan to place monitored phone calls to both Kathleen and James Johnson. During these recorded conversations, Donovan expressed fear that the authorities were closing, prompting Kathleen to warn him against speaking to the police. James Johnson also made incriminating remarks regarding the potential decomposition of the body due to recent weather conditions in the mountains. Armed with this undeniable proof, the Albuquerque Police Department obtained arrest warrants, taking James Johnson into custody on September 24, 2009, followed by Kathleen the next day. While the suspects were in custody, prosecutors faced the challenge of proving their case without the physical recovery of the victim. Both Kathleen and James invoked their legal rights, refusing to cooperate. However, a statement from Bella Gonzalez provided further clarity regarding the motive, detailing how Kathleen had flown into an absolute rage following Brian's arrest, masterminding the crime to ensure Ellen would not have the last word. Recognizing the strength of the evidence against her, Kathleen ultimately chose to confess, leading detectives to the remote site in the Jemez Mountains, where Ellen's body had been buried under a blue tarp. The recovery of the remains by the Office of the Medical Investigator provided the definitive physical evidence required to close the case. The legal proceedings concluded with significant prison sentences for those involved. Christopher Donovan pled guilty to second-degree homicide, receiving up to 15 years in prison. James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder and conspiracy, resulting in a 28-year sentence. Cathleen Roth, identified as the instigator of the conspiracy, pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and tampering with evidence, receiving a sentence of 37.5 years. Brian Roth was not charged in connection with the homicide, as evidence confirmed he was incarcerated at the time the crime took place. The sophistication of these criminals was ultimately overshadowed by their absolute lack of foresight and the inherent instability of their conspiracy. While they managed to orchestrate a pre-planned ambush and attempt to sanitize the vehicle, their belief that they could maintain absolute silence among 4 separate individuals was a fatal miscalculation. The moment pressure was applied, the fragile alliance crumbled, illustrating a common truth in criminal psychology: that accomplices almost always prioritize their own survival when confronted by dedicated investigators. This tragic case offers profound life lessons for the prevention of domestic violence and elder abuse. It underscores the critical importance of recognizing early warning signs, such as escalating verbal hostility, threats of physical violence, and financial exploitation. Communities must foster environments where vulnerable individuals feel supported in seeking help, and where domestic disputes are not ignored out of a misplaced respect for privacy. Furthermore, the successful resolution of this case highlights the effectiveness of modern law enforcement strategies, particularly the integration of financial auditing, communication surveillance, and strategic patience. By honoring the memory of Ellen Roth, we reaffirm our commitment to protecting the vulnerable and upholding the values of justice, empathy, and community safety. The silence that fell over the quiet suburbs of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on a warm spring afternoon in May of the year 2009, marked the beginning of a deeply unsettling mystery. It was a time when the peaceful routine of a dedicated 61-year-old schoolteacher named Ellen Roth was abruptly shattered, leaving those who knew her in a state of profound anxiety. The first indication that something was terribly wrong came from her colleague, Cathleen Roth, who realized that Ellen had missed work for several consecutive days. This was an occurrence completely out of character for a woman who was famously reliable, always arriving on time regardless of rain, snow, or any other obstacle. Concerned for her friend's well-being, Cathleen traveled to Elena's home to investigate. Upon arriving, she heard the frantic barking of dogs from inside the residence, but there were no other signs of life. The silence from the house was deeply disturbing, prompting Cathleen to contact the Albuquerque Police Department to request a welfare check, fearing that her colleague might have suffered a sudden medical emergency inside. When the responding officers arrived at the residence, they immediately noted several troubling physical details that heightened their concern. A stack of newspapers lay untouched on the porch, gathering dust and indicating that no one had entered or exited the home for days. Cathleen shared her worries with the officers, explaining that Ellen had previously suffered a serious fall in her home, which made her vulnerable to another accident. Based on these circumstances, the officers made the decision to force entry into the residence to ensure Ellen was not lying injured inside. However, once they crossed the threshold, they found the home empty. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and nothing to suggest that a violent confrontation had occurred within the living spaces. The only occupants were Ellen's 2 beloved dogs, who had been confined to a room with an unusually large, overflowing bowl of food and a generous supply of water. Cathleen immediately pointed out that this arrangement was highly suspicious, as Ellen was a devoted pet owner who would never leave her animals in such a careless manner. The massive food bowl suggested that someone had prepared the dogs for a long absence, serving as an early indicator of a deliberate plan. To understand how Ellen could have vanished so suddenly, The investigators began a deep dive into her background, uncovering a life dedicated to service, education, and family. Born on April 15, 1948, in Miami, Florida, Ellen Feeder was the only daughter in a family of 4 children. Her father, Emmanuel, served as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, a role that eventually brought the family to Albuquerque. From her youth, Ellen possessed a vibrant, outgoing personality and a passion for education. She returned to her birthplace to attend the University of Miami, where she took classes in education and discovered her love for teaching. After completing her undergraduate studies, she returned to Albuquerque, where she obtained a Master S degree in bilingual education and began a long, fulfilling career as a school teacher. Ellen loved watching her students grow, and her dedication was reflected in the many former students who returned to visit her over the years. When she was not in the classroom, she was an avid traveler, spending her summers exploring different corners of the globe and sharing her adventures with her close-knit circle of friends. Despite her professional success and rich personal life, Ellen harbored a deep, lifelong desire to become a mother. In 1986, she met Jerry Roth, a successful lawyer who possessed the stability and care she had been seeking. The couple married in 1987, but starting a family proved to be a difficult journey. After several years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, Ellen proposed the idea of adoption. Although Jerry was initially hesitant, he eventually agreed, and in 1990 they welcomed a newborn son, whom they named Brian. Ellen was filled with immense joy, feeling that her life was finally complete. However, the demands of raising a child took a toll on the marriage, and the couple divorced less than a year later. Jerry granted full custody of Brian to Ellen, who embraced the challenges of being a single mother with unwavering love and devotion. As Brian grew, however, the challenges intensified, and his development was marked by increasingly complex behavioral issues that tested Ellen's patience and maternal resolve. By the year 2009, Ellen was transitioning into her golden years, looking forward to retirement and hoping to see her son build a stable future. Brian, now 19 years old, had recently married a young woman named Kathleen Kit Nielsen, whom he had met at a local recovery center known as New Day. Both Brian and Kathleen had struggled with personal difficulties, finding solace in their shared experiences of feeling misunderstood by their families. While Ellen hoped that this marriage would bring Brian peace, his destructive patterns quickly reemerged. His struggle with prohibited substances escalated, and his interactions with his mother became increasingly volatile. On March 25, 2009, the conflict reached a dangerous peak when Brian threatened Ellen with a knife, leading to his arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Although he was sentenced to 1 year of probation, the cycle of conflict did not end there, and Ellen soon found herself the victim of further exploitation. On April 26, 2009, just weeks after the domestic assault, Ellen noticed unauthorized transactions on her bank account and realized her debit card was missing. Upon inspecting her home, she discovered that several valuable pieces of family jewelry, including 2 diamond rings, a wedding band, a dinner ring, and 3 necklaces, had also disappeared. Suspecting her son had used his access to the house to steal these items, Ellen conducted her own investigation. She contacted the local businesses where her card had been used, including a 7-Eleven, a tobacco shop, and a Walmart. An employee at the tobacco shop confirmed that a young man matching Brian S.'s description had made the purchases, falsely claiming he had his mother's permission. Armed with this evidence, Ellen filed a police report, refusing to allow her son's destructive behavior to go unchecked. The timing of this report, occurring just 4 days before her disappearance, immediately drew the suspicion of the detectives assigned to her case. The investigation gained momentum on May 10, 2009, when the police received a report of an abandoned vehicle in the International District of Albuquerque. Officers confirmed that the vehicle was Ellen S. 2007 Dodge Caravan, though the license plates had been switched to conceal its identity. A forensic examination of the minivan revealed that the interior had been meticulously wiped down, leaving no traces of DNA, fingerprints, or other physical evidence. This discovery, combined with the complete lack of activity on Ellen's phone and bank cards, led investigators to a grim conclusion. On May 11, 2009, the case was officially reclassified from a missing person inquiry to a homicide investigation, as detectives recognized that Ellen had likely met with foul play. The primary suspect in the early stages of the investigation was naturally Brian Roth, given his history of violence and the recent theft accusations. Detectives visited Brian at the Metropolitan Detention Center, where he had been held since May 1, 2009, following a probation violation for testing positive for prohibited substances. Because he was already incarcerated at the time of Ellen's disappearance, Brian could not have physically committed the crime. But detectives remained open to the possibility that he had coordinated the act from within the facility. During his interview, Brian denied any involvement in his mother's disappearance and suggested she might have suffered an accident, recounting an incident on April 25th, where she had allegedly fallen from her bed and injured her head. He claimed that he and Cathleen had helped clean up the room and that Ellen had given them her debit card as a gesture of appreciation, a claim that directly contradicted Ellen's subsequent police report. To verify these claims, investigators interviewed 21-year-old Cathleen Roth, who initially portrayed herself as a concerned and cooperative family member. Cathleen echoed Brian's version of events, claiming that Ellen's police report was merely a manipulative power play to control her son. She asserted that her last contact with Ellen was a phone call on May 1st, during which she tried to calm her mother-in-law down after she angrily accused them of theft. However, detectives uncovered a major discrepancy when they spoke with Ellen's sister-in-law, who had been visiting Ellen on the day of that phone call. The sister-in-law reported that Cathleen had been highly aggressive and hostile during the conversation, blaming Ellen for Brian's recent arrest and showing no signs of the calm demeanor she had claimed. The breakthrough in the investigation came when detectives reviewed recordings of phone calls made by Brian from the detention center. In a recording from May 1st, Brian was heard instructing Cathleen to quickly remove all stolen items and the debit card from their apartment, an order that Cathleen confirmed she was executing. This conversation explained why a subsequent search of their residence had yielded no physical evidence of the theft. Furthermore, the recordings revealed the existence of an unconventional relationship dynamic, as Brian asked Cathleen to convey his love to another woman named Bella Gonzalez. When confronted with this information, Cathleen admitted that she and Brian were in an open relationship and that their marriage was primarily an arrangement of convenience to secure financial and administrative benefits. She also conceded that their relationship with Ellen was motivated almost entirely by financial exploitation, as they relied on her to pay their bills and purchase fuel. Despite these revealing inconsistencies, the police lacked the physical evidence necessary to make an arrest, and Cathleen was allowed to leave. The case remained unresolved for 4 months until September 1st, 2009, when an individual walked into the Edgewood Police Department with information that would break the case wide open. The informant claimed that a young man named Christopher Donovan, an active member of the United States Air Force stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base, had confessed to being involved in the disappearance and death of the Albuquerque schoolteacher. The informant stated that Christopher S. roommate, James Johnson, had committed the fatal act and that James was actually Cathleen Roth's boyfriend. Investigators immediately brought Christopher Donovan in for questioning, and he quickly agreed to cooperate. He admitted that he had acted as the driver on the day of the crime, transporting Cathleen and James to Ellen.'s residence. He explained that Cathleen had used a spare garage door opener to gain entry to the home, where she and James waited in the garage for Ellen to prepare for work. Once Ellen appeared, James carried out the fatal physical assault, depriving her of life. Christopher then helped them wrap Ellen's body in a tarp, place it in her minivan, and transport it to a remote pre-dug grave in the Jemez Mountains. To secure additional evidence, Christopher agreed to make monitored phone calls to his co-conspirators, during which James made highly incriminating statements about the concealment of the body, providing the police with the evidence needed to obtain arrest warrants. James Johnson was arrested on September 24, 2009, and Cathleen Roth was taken into custody the following day. Although both suspects refused to speak to authorities, prosecutors were able to build a strong case with the help of Bella Gonzalez, who testified that Cathleen had flown into a rage when Brian was arrested, blaming Ellen and orchestrating the plot as a form of personal revenge. Facing the prospect of a lengthy trial and overwhelming evidence, Cathleen eventually agreed to cooperate, leading detectives to the shallow grave in the Jemez Mountains where Ellen's body was recovered. The legal proceedings concluded. Ve Kep. Ite hot plea agreements for all 3 conspirators. Christopher Donovan pleaded guilty to second-degree homicide and received a 15-year prison sentence. James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper ve kipte, hot evidence, resulting in a 28-year prison sentence. Cathleen Roth pleaded guilty to the same charges and was sentenced to 37.5 years in prison, while Brian Roth was not charged as he was incarcerated at the time of the crime and had no knowledge of the conspiracy. This tragic case offers a profound and sobering look into the psychological motives that drive individuals to commit horrific acts against those who support them. The primary catalyst was a toxic combination of financial greed, deep-seated resentment, and an intense sense of entitlement. Cathleen Roth and her co-conspirators did not view Ellen as a maternal figure or a caring educator, but merely as a financial resource to be exploited at their convenience. When Ellen attempted to establish healthy boundaries by reporting the theft of her property, she threatened their effortless lifestyle, triggering a narcissistic rage in Cathleen. Instead of taking responsibility for their own criminal actions, the perpetrators displaced their anger onto the victim, rationalizing their horrific plot as a form of retribution. This defensive displacement of blame is a common psychological mechanism among manipulative personalities, who often view themselves as the true victims when their exploitative behaviors are challenged. Furthermore, this case highlights a broader and deeply concerning social trend regarding the vulnerability of supportive family members to domestic violence and elder abuse. Often, individuals who spend their lives nurturing others find it difficult to recognize the danger posed by those they love, leading to enabling behaviors that can inadvertently shield troubled individuals from the consequences of their actions. While born out of a desire to help, enabling can allow behavioral and substance abuse issues to escalate into serious criminal conduct. It is essential for families and communities to understand that establishing firm, healthy boundaries is not a lack of love, but a vital measure of protection for everyone involved. Recognizing financial exploitation as a precursor to physical violence is a crucial step in preventing such tragedies from occurring in other households. The resolution of this case stands as a testament to the exceptional dedication, patience, and analytical skills of the law enforcement officers involved. The Albuquerque Police Department successfully navigated a complex web of deception by combining traditional investigative techniques with modern forensic tools. Key details, such as the unusual state of the home and the care of the pets, served as early indicators that allowed detectives to quickly look past the initial appearance of a simple missing person case. Financial forensics played a critical role, as tracking the unauthorized transactions allowed investigators to establish a clear timeline and identify the primary suspects. Additionally, the systematic review of recorded communications from the detention center exposed the suspect's deception and revealed the hidden relationships that ultimately led to the conspirators, demonstrating the power of thorough and meticulous police work. There is also a profound, albeit dark, irony in the foolishness and arrogance of the criminals, whose attempts at sophistication were ultimately their undoing. While they took steps to pre-dig a grave, wipe down the vehicle, and alter the license plates, their belief in their own intelligence was completely undermined by their actions. They discussed their crimes openly. Vaypaitahat roommates and acquaintances carried out incriminating conversations over recorded jailhouse telephones and left an obvious trail of financial transactions at local businesses. This stark contrast between their planned sophistication and their sheer carelessness highlights a common loophole in the criminal mind, where arrogance frequently leads to self-sabotage, ensuring that justice is ultimately served. To prevent such tragic outcomes in the future, society must foster a culture of vigilance and support for those facing domestic exploitation. Communities must be educated to recognize the warning signs of financial and psychological abuse, encouraging individuals to seek early intervention from professional support services. Establishing legal protections, such as securing personal assets and limiting access to residences, can provide physical barriers to exploitation. Moreover, maintaining open lines of communication with trusted friends, neighbors, and colleagues ensures that vulnerable individuals do not become isolated, creating a vital network of safety that can intervene before a situation escalates into violence. Finally, sharing experiences on how law enforcement can expedite investigations is invaluable for public safety. This case underscores the critical importance of community engagement and the role of anonymous informants in solving complex crimes. By building trust and encouraging public cooperation, police departments can ensure that vital information is shared more quickly. Additionally, the integration of advanced digital tools such as real-time communication monitoring, financial transaction alerts, and shared databases across jurisdictions can significantly reduce the time needed to locate missing persons and apprehend suspects. The swift, coordinated efforts of the investigating forces, combined with the vigilance of the community, remain the most effective tools to combat harm, ensuring that the memory of dedicated individuals like Ellen Roth is preserved and that justice always prevails over greed and violence. The human mind often seeks patterns of safety and predictability in the daily routines of life, constructing a protective shield out of the familiar rhythms of work, family, and home. When those rhythms suddenly fracture, the quiet spaces left behind can speak far louder than any cry for help. Such was the case in the warm spring of the year 2009, in the high desert city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque is a place where the dramatic Sandia Mountains rise sharply against an endless blue sky, a landscape of contrasts where urban neighborhoods eventually yield to vast stretches of arid beauty. Within this community, a 61-year-old elementary school reading specialist named Ellen Roth had spent decades building a life centered on the quiet, noble pursuit of educating children. She was a woman defined by her consistency, her deep devotion to her students at Chelwood Elementary School, and an unwavering commitment to her daily responsibilities. To her colleagues, Ellen was a pillar of reliability, the kind of dedicated educator who would arrive at her classroom ahead of schedule, undeterred by rain, snow, or the unpredictable spring winds of New Mexico. On the afternoon of May 6, 2009, that shield of predictability shattered completely. Catherine Frost, a close friend and co-worker of Ellen, stood outside L&S residence in the northeast quadrant of Albuquerque, feeling an icy chill of anxiety despite the afternoon warmth. Ellen had not shown up for her teaching duties for a couple of days, an absence so profoundly out of character that it immediately sent shockwaves of concern through her social circle. Standing on the porch, Catherine could hear the frantic, distressed barking of Ellen's beloved dogs from inside the home. Yet there was no answer at the door. Looking down, she noticed a stack of untouched newspapers piling up on the porch, a silent testament to days slipping by without the presence of the home's owner. Knowing Ellen's deep affection for her animals, Catherine realized that Ellen would never willingly abandon her dogs, let alone leave them unattended without a word. Terrified that her friend might have suffered a medical emergency, such as a severe fall inside the residence, Catherine contacted the Albuquerque Police Department and requested a welfare check. When the responding police officers arrived at the quiet residential street, they assessed the scene with a practiced, analytical eye. The growing pile of newspapers, the absence of any vehicular activity, and the persistent barking of the dogs inside all pointed toward an unusual situation. Recognizing the potential for an injured homeowner who might be unable to reach the door, the officers made the logical decision to force entry into the house. What they found inside, however, did not clarify the situation. Rather, it deepened the mystery. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, and no physical evidence of a violent struggle within the rooms. The home was quiet, save for the two distressed canines. The officers observed that the dogs had been left with a substantial amount of water and an overflowing bowl of food. To the casual observer, this might have looked like a simple act of preparation, but to Catherine Frost and the investigating detectives, it was a glaring red flag. The food had been piled high in a manner that suggested someone had deliberately laid out sustenance, knowing the animals would not be cared for or visited for several days. It was a cold, calculated arrangement that did not align with the gentle daily care Ellen always bestowed upon her pets. As the Albuquerque Police Department initiated a missing persons investigation, Detectives began a meticulous deep dive into Ellen S.'s background, attempting to reconstruct the trajectory of her life and identify any potential vectors of danger. Ellen Fetter had been born on April 15, 1948, in Miami, Florida, to Emmanuel and Judith Fetter. She was the only daughter in a family of 4 children, growing up alongside her brothers in a household that eventually relocated to Albuquerque when her father, an Air Force second lieutenant, was stationed there. From a young age, Ellen possessed a vibrant, outgoing personality and an insatiable appetite for education. Her academic journey eventually led her back to her birthplace, where she attended the University of Miami to study education. Discovering a profound joy in working with children, she returned to New Mexico to earn her Master S degree in bilingual education, embarking on a teaching career that would span 25 years. Outside the classroom, Ellen lived a full and adventurous life, traveling the globe during her summer breaks and sharing stories of her international explorations with her family and friends. Yet, despite her professional fulfillment and her love of travel, Ellen harbored deep, lifelong desire to experience motherhood. In her late 30s, having not yet found the ideal partner, she met a successful attorney named Jerry Roth. After a year of dating, the two were married in 1987. When natural conception proved difficult, Ellen passionately pursued adoption, eventually convincing her husband to take that monumental step. In 1990, their dreams were realized when they adopted a newborn son, whom they named Brian. Ellen was overjoyed, feeling that her life was finally complete. However, the domestic bliss was short-lived. The intense focus Ellen placed on raising her infant son created an irreparable drift in her marriage. And less than a year after the adoption, Jerry filed for divorce. He granted Ellen full custody of Brian, a decision she welcomed with open arms, confident that she could provide a nurturing, loving environment as a single mother. As the years progressed, the path of motherhood proved far more turbulent than Ellen could have ever anticipated. Raising a child alone is a daunting task under any circumstances. But as Brian grew, he began to exhibit severe behavioral and psychological challenges. Despite Ellen's best efforts to shower him with unconditional love and support, Brian struggled with deep-seated feelings of resentment. He grew to view his mother's wealth and affection not as a sanctuary, but as a form of control, later expressing a toxic belief that he had been adopted merely as an ornamental addition to her life rather than as a cherished son. By his teenage years, Brian's behavioral issues escalated into substance abuse and open confrontation. In a desperate bid to help her son overcome his destructive patterns, Ellen practiced a difficult form of tough love, eventually enrolling him in a local youth recovery center known as New Day and requiring him to live outside her primary home. It was during his time in the recovery program that Brian met Kathleen Kit Nielsen, a 21-year-old fellow patient who harbored her own deep-seated emotional wounds and familial resentments. The two young people quickly bonded over their shared feelings of alienation and anger toward their respective families. This connection, born of mutual pain and instability, solidified rapidly. They eventually entered into a marriage, an arrangement that detectives would later discover was highly unconventional, serving as a practical partnership to secure government benefits and insurance, while both individuals continued to date other people. For Brian, Kathleen became an enabler of his worst impulses, while Kathleen found in Brian an entry point into a family with financial resources she felt entitled to exploit. As detectives investigated further, they discovered that the relationship between Ellen and her son had degenerated into a cycle of domestic conflict that had recently escalated to a terrifying degree. On March 25, 2009, just weeks before Ellen's disappearance, the Albuquerque Police Department had been called to Ellen's home following a violent domestic episode. During this altercation, 19-year-old Brian had threatened his mother. Vekhepatehat, a deadly weapon, brandishing a knife during a confrontation. Ellen, fearing for her life, had made the painful decision to have her son arrested. Brian was subsequently charged Vekhepatehat aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and placed on probation for 1 year. This domestic violence incident placed Brian at the very top of the detectives' list of suspects. However, the complexity of the case deepened when investigators reviewed the chronological timeline of the days leading up to Ellen's disappearance. On April 26, 2009, less than 2 weeks before she vanished, Ellen had contacted the police once again to report a significant theft. She had discovered unauthorized transactions on her debit card at several local businesses, including a Walmart, a tobacco shop, and a 7-Eleven convenience store. Upon inspecting her home, she realized that several highly valuable personal items were missing, including 3 necklaces, a wedding band, a dinner ring, and 2 diamond rings. Suspecting her son was responsible, Ellen had conducted her own preliminary investigation, calling the tobacco shop and speaking with an employee who provided a description that matched Brian perfectly. The employee noted that the young man had claimed his mother gave him permission to use the card, using his identical last name to bypass suspicion. The timing of this second police report, filed just days before Ellen vanished, strongly suggested a motive of retaliation. Detectives theorized that Brian, facing a potential return to incarceration for violating his probation, might have acted out of desperation or rage. However, when investigators contacted Brian's probation officer, they encountered a critical alibi that disrupted their initial hypothesis. On May 1, 2009, Brian had been arrested for a probation violation after testing positive for illicit narcotics. He had been taken into physical custody and remained incarcerated at the Metropolitan Detention Center continuously from that date forward. Because he was locked inside a cell at the time Ellen was believed to have disappeared, it was physically impossible for him to have personally executed any physical harm against his mother during that critical window. This revelation forced the investigative team to pivot, widening their analytical lens to consider alternative theories. If Brian was securely behind bars, who else had the motive, opportunity, and cold-blooded determination to harm a beloved schoolteacher? On May 10, 2009, 4 days after the initial welfare check, the police received a crucial breakthrough. A resident in the International District of Albuquerque reported a suspicious, potentially stolen vehicle parked in their neighborhood. When officers responded, they discovered a 2007 Dodge Caravan. Although the license plate on the rear did not match the vehicle, a quick verification of the unique vehicle identification number confirmed that the minivan belonged to Ellen Roth. The location of the vehicle immediately heightened the detectives' suspicions. Ellen's life was defined by a highly predictable, almost reclusive routine. She traveled primarily between her home in the quiet northeast area of the city and the elementary school where she taught. The presence of her vehicle in the International District, a neighborhood far removed from her daily path, was highly anomalous. Furthermore, a forensic examination of the minivan revealed that the interior had been meticulously and freshly wiped down to destroy any trace evidence, including fingerprints, hair fibers, or DNA. This deliberate sanitization of the vehicle signaled to the investigative team that they were no longer dealing vekep, itehat, a simple missing persons case. No routine accident or voluntary departure would involve the meticulous cleaning of a vehicle and its abandonment in a distant neighborhood. By May 11, 2009, the Albuquerque Police Department officially reclassified the investigation as a homicide. The complete absence of any financial activity on Ellen.'s bank cards, the silence of her cellular phone, the abandoned and wiped vehicle, and the unnatural state of her home all pointed to a single, tragic conclusion. Ellen Roth had been killed. Yet the detectives faced a daunting challenge. They had no body, no crime scene containing physical evidence of violence, and their primary suspect was locked in a jail cell. In an effort to uncover a potential conspiracy, detectives visited Brian Roth at the Metropolitan Detention Center on the afternoon of May 11th. During the interview, Brian appeared outwardly concerned for his mother's well-being, suggesting that her absence might be the result of an accidental injury. He recounted an incident that he claimed had occurred on the night of April 25, 2009. According to Brian, Ellen had taken an extra sleeping pill, lost her balance, and fallen out of bed, striking her head against a bedside lamp. He claimed that the fall had caused significant bleeding and that he and his wife, Cathleen, had gone to the house the following morning to help clean up the blood. He asserted that this was the last time he had seen his mother alive, painting a picture of an unfortunate accident rather than a deliberate crime. Later that same afternoon, investigators brought 21-year-old Cathleen Roth in for questioning. Cathleen adopted an attitude of deep concern, describing the situation as surreal and comparing the unfolding events to an episode of a suspenseful television program. She corroborated Brian's account of the bedside accident, claiming that after they cleaned up the blood, a grateful Ellen had willingly handed over her debit card and told them to purchase something for themselves. Cathleen admitted that they had gone somewhat overboard with the purchases, but claimed that they had apologized the following day and presented Ellen with the receipts. According to Cathleen, Ellen's subsequent police report regarding the stolen card and jewelry was merely a manipulative power play designed to maintain control over Brian, a tactic she claimed Ellen had used in the past. Cathleen asserted that she had last spoken to Ellen on May 1st, during a telephone conversation where Ellen had angrily accused her of involvement in the thefts. While Cathleen's interview ended with her consent to a search of her apartment, which yielded no immediate physical evidence, detectives remained deeply skeptical of her narrative. They recognized that a significant discrepancy existed between the way Cathleen described her final interaction, vekep te hat Ellen, and the way other family members perceived the dynamic. Ellen's sister-in-law, who had been visiting Ellen's home around the time of that final phone call, reported overhearing a highly aggressive, confrontational conversation. In contrast to Cathleen's claim of being a calm, defensive participant, the sister-in-law described Cathleen as hostile, angry, and openly blaming Ellen for Brian's arrest and subsequent incarceration. This psychological inconsistency prompted detectives to employ a powerful investigative tool, the analysis of recorded communications. Because Brian was incarcerated, all of his outgoing telephone calls from the Metropolitan Detention Center were systematically recorded. Investigators began a meticulous review of the calls Brian had made since his arrest on May 1st. Almost immediately, They struck algorithmic gold. On the very day of his arrest, Brian had placed a call to Cathleen. In a frantic tone, he instructed her to immediately remove everything from their apartment that they had stolen, specifically mentioning the credit cards. Kathleen S.'s response was immediate and chilling. She assured him that she was already on the case. This brief exchange explained why the subsequent search of their apartment had yielded no evidence. Kathleen had successfully sanitized the residence before the police arrived. But the recorded telephone calls revealed an even more complex web of relationships. During one call, Kathleen informed Brian that she was currently staying at the home of a woman named Bella. Brian, speaking to his wife, asked her to convey his love to Bella. This unusual display of affection toward another woman within a marriage prompted detectives to press Kathleen further during a follow-up interview on May 28, 2009. Faced with the recorded evidence, Kathleen S.'s facade began to crumble. She admitted that she had lied about the debit card, acknowledging that she and Brian had indeed stolen it from Ellen. She also explained the nature of their relationship, revealing that they practiced an open polyamorous marriage. Bella Gonzalez, she explained, was actually Brian S.'s girlfriend. Kathleen, painting a picture of a relationship of convenience, where they utilized their marriage to secure government assistance while living independent romantic lives. Crucially, Kathleen admitted that their relationship with Ellen was largely parasitic, driven by a desire to exploit the older woman for financial support, gas money, and assistance with their living expenses. Despite these revelations, the detectives chose not to make an immediate arrest. They understood that in a suspected homicide case without a body, premature charges can allow guilty parties to escape justice. They allowed Kathleen to remain free, placing her under discreet surveillance in the hope that her actions or movements might lead them to Ellen's whereabouts or expose her accomplices. For several months, the case remained in an agonizing holding pattern. Kathleen made no overt, suspicious moves, and the trail seemed to be growing cold as summer turned to autumn. The definitive breakthrough in the investigation came on September 1, 2009, from an entirely unexpected source. A man walked into the Edgewood Police Department, a small law enforcement agency located east of Albuquerque. He carried with him a heavy burden of conscience, explaining to the officers that he possessed critical information regarding the missing Albuquerque schoolteacher. The informant stated that he had been agonizing over the decision to come forward, but could no longer remain silent. He revealed that a young man named Christopher Donovan had admitted to being involved in the disappearance and death of the teacher, and that another individual named James Johnson had physically choked Ellen Roth to death. This disclosure introduced two entirely new actors into the investigation, sending shockwaves through the detective unit. Investigators immediately sought to establish the identities of these individuals and their connection to Cathleen Roth. They quickly discovered that 20-year-old Christopher Donovan was an active-duty airman stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, sharing an apartment with 23-year-old James Johnson. Most importantly, detectives learned that James Johnson was Kathleen S.'s boyfriend, a crucial piece of the puzzle that Kathleen had carefully omitted when explaining her polyamorous marriage to the police. Armed with this critical intelligence, investigators brought Christopher Donovan in for questioning. Confronted by detectives, the young airman's resolve dissolved, and he delivered a comprehensive confession that laid bare the entire horrifying conspiracy. Christopher admitted that while he was not present in the physical room when Ellen was killed, he had acted as the driver and an active accomplice in the disposal of her body. He explained that on the morning of the murder, Cathleen had utilized a garage door opener that Ellen had previously trusted her with. Cathleen and James Johnson had entered Ellen S.'s garage, hiding in the shadows as they waited for the dedicated teacher to prepare for her workday. When Ellen stepped into the garage to head to school, they ambushed her. James Johnson physically assaulted Ellen, choking her until she no longer breathed. After the fatal struggle, the conspirators wrapped Ellen's body, placed it into the rear of her own 2007 Dodge Caravan, and sent a text message to Christopher Donovan to signal that the act was complete. Christopher then met them, assisting in the transport of the body. They drove deep into the remote, rugged terrain of the Jemez Mountains, navigating to a secluded area where they had previously excavated a shallow grave. They placed Ellen into the ground, covering her with a blue tarp and earth, believing that the vastness of the forest would forever conceal their crime. Christopher described Kathleen's attitude following the murder as one of disturbing pride, suggesting that she viewed the violent act as an ultimate demonstration of loyalty and a successful elimination of a financial obstacle and a personal nuisance. To solidify their case and secure the necessary physical evidence, detectives convinced Christopher Donovan to cooperate in a monitored telephonic operation. Christopher placed recorded calls to both Cathleen and James Johnson, claiming to be terrified that the police were closing in on him. When he spoke to Cathleen, she coldly instructed him to remain silent and reveal nothing to the authorities. However, the call to James Johnson proved even more incriminating. When Christopher asked if he thought the body would be discovered, James responded with chilling indifference, noting that the persistent rain in the mountains would likely aid in concealing the grave. With these recorded confessions, prosecutors obtained arrest warrants for both James Johnson and Cathleen Roth. On September 24, 2009, James was taken into custody, followed by Cathleen the next day. Yet, even with the conspirators behind bars, the prosecution faced a significant legal hurdle. Without the physical recovery of Ellen's body, proving the cause of death and securing a conviction for first-degree murder would remain incredibly difficult. Both Cathleen and James immediately invoked their constitutional right to remain silent, refusing to assist investigators in locating the burial site. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place through the cooperation of Bella Gonzalez, Brian's girlfriend. Bella provided crucial insight into Kathleen's psychological state and the underlying motive for the crime. According to Bella, when Brian was arrested on May 1st for the probation violation, Cathleen had flown into a manic, vindictive rage. She blamed Ellen entirely for Brian's incarceration, viewing the mother's decision to involve the police as an act of war. Driven by a toxic mix of financial desperation, entitlement, and a desire for revenge, Cathleen cast herself as a mastermind who would avenge her husband and secure access to Ellen's estate. She had successfully manipulated James Johnson, who was deeply infatuated with her, and Christopher Donovan into participating in her deadly plot. Faced with the overwhelming weight of the evidence, including Christopher Donovan's detailed confession and the recorded telephone calls, Kathleen's defense team recognized the futility of going to trial. In exchange for a plea agreement that would spare her the possibility of a maximum life sentence without parole, Cathleen agreed to cooperate and lead investigators to the exact location of the grave. Several caravans of detectives, Forensic specialists and recovery teams traveled deep into the quiet, pristine beauty of the Jemez Mountains. Guided by Cathleen's directions, they navigated to a remote, heavily forested area. After a careful excavation of approximately 2 feet of earth, the team exposed a blue tarp. Beneath it lay the remains of Ellen Roth, bringing a somber, tragic end to the 5-month search for the missing teacher. The office of the medical investigator retrieved the body, confirming the cause of death and allowing her grieving family to finally lay her to rest with the dignity she so richly deserved. In the legal proceedings that followed, the justice system worked to hold the perpetrators accountable for their heinous actions. Christopher Donovan, whose cooperation had been vital in breaking the case open, pled guilty to second-degree homicide and was sentenced to a term of up to 15 years in prison. James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper, vekep itahat evidence, receiving a sentence of 28 years of incarceration. Cathleen Roth, identified as the manipulative mastermind of the entire conspiracy, pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. She was sentenced to 37.5 years in prison, ensuring that she would spend the majority of her adult life behind bars. Brian Roth, who was securely incarcerated at the time the murder occurred, was not charged in connection with his mother's death, as investigators found no evidence that he was aware of or participated in the conspiracy. This tragic case offers profound, sobering lessons for Bayote Hot families and the broader community regarding the complex dynamics of domestic conflict, financial exploitation, and the psychological indicators of extreme manipulation. The transformation of a family home from a sanctuary of love into an arena of abuse, culminating in a cold-blooded conspiracy, highlights the critical importance of early intervention in cases of domestic violence, even when the perpetrator is a child. Ellen Roth's tragic fate reminds us that the signs of coercive control, entitlement, and escalating hostility must never be minimized or dismissed as temporary behavioral phases. From an investigative standpoint, the resolution of this case underscores the vital role of modern forensic techniques, psychological profiling, and the strategic utilization of technological footprints. The meticulous monitoring of jailhouse communications, the analysis of cell phone records, and the forensic examination of abandoned vehicles serve as a testament to the sophistication and dedication of law enforcement forces. By recognizing the subtle behavioral anomalies, such as the unusual state of the victim's pets and the strategic cleaning of her vehicle, detectives were able to pierce through a web of lies and bring a calculating group of criminals to justice. In the end, the memory of Ellen Roth lives on, not through the tragic circumstances of her death, but through the hundreds of children she taught to read, the family that honors her name, and the enduring triumph of justice over a dark, short-sighted conspiracy. It was a warm spring afternoon in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, on May 6, 2009, when a worried phone call reached the local authorities. The caller was Catherine Frost, a dedicated schoolteacher who was deeply concerned about her 61-year-old coworker, Ellen Roth. Ellen, a beloved and highly reliable bilingual education teacher, had failed to show up for work for a couple of days. For anyone who knew Ellen, this was a massive alarm bell. She was a woman of absolute routine, showing up to her classroom on time, regardless of rain, snow, or any personal obstacles. She was simply not the type of person to disappear without a word. When officers from the Albuquerque Police Department arrived at Ellen's residence to conduct a welfare check, the signs of her sudden absence were immediately striking. Outside the home, several days of untouched newspapers were stacked neatly but abandoned. Catherine Frost, who accompanied the officers, expressed a profound fear that Ellen might have suffered a medical emergency inside. She recalled a prior incident where Ellen had reportedly taken her sleeping medication, fallen out of bed, and sustained a serious head injury. This memory prompted the officers to make the decision to force entry into the home to ensure she was not lying injured inside. Upon entering, however, the police did not find Ellen, nor did they find any obvious signs of a struggle or forced entry. The interior of the home appeared undisturbed, but there was one highly unusual and deeply concerning detail. Inside the residence, the officers discovered Ellen's 2 dogs. The animals had been barricaded in a specific area, and they had been left with a massive, overflowing bowl of food and plenty of water. While to a casual observer, this might have looked like a homeowner, making sure her pets were fed, to Catherine Frost, it was a clear sign of foul play. Ellen loved her dogs deeply and treated them with immense care. She would never have left them in such a manner, nor would she have piled food in such an overflowing fashion. It looked as though someone else had hastily placed the dogs there, knowing that it would be several days before anyone would find them. This calculated preparation of the pet's food bowl became the first major red flag for the responding officers. As the Albuquerque Police Department began their investigation, they realized they needed to look deeply into the background of this missing teacher. Ellen Feeder was born on April 15, 1948, in Miami, Florida, to Emmanuel and Judith Feeder. She grew up as the only daughter in a family of 4 children. Her father, a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, was eventually stationed in Albuquerque, which brought the family to New Mexico. Ellen was a bright, outgoing individual with a deep passion for education. She returned to her birthplace to attend the University of Miami for her undergraduate studies, specializing in education. She discovered a genuine love for teaching children, finding immense fulfillment in watching them grow and learn. After completing her degree, she returned to Albuquerque, earned a master's degree in bilingual education, and embarked on a long and successful career in the public school system. Outside of her professional life, Ellen was an avid traveler. She spent nearly every summer exploring different corners of the globe, sharing vibrant stories of her adventures with her family and friends. Yet, despite her professional success and rich personal life, Ellen's primary goal was to become a mother. She dated but struggled to find the right partner until her late 30s, when she met Jerry Roth, a highly successful lawyer. They married in 1987, and Ellen hoped to start a family. When conceiving biological children proved difficult, she persuaded her husband to pursue adoption. In 1990, they welcomed a newborn son whom they named Brian. Ellen was overjoyed, feeling that her life was finally complete. Unfortunately, the marriage did not survive the transition. Ellen's intense focus on raising her new son strained her relationship with Jerry, and they divorced less than a year after the adoption. Jerry granted Ellen full custody of Brian, a decision that pleased her immensely as she was determined to devote her life to her son. However, raising Brian as a single mother proved to be an incredibly difficult journey. As Brian grew, he began to exhibit severe behavioral issues and later struggled with substance abuse. Ellen tried to meet these immense challenges with unconditional love and support, but her efforts were often met with hostility. Over the years, Brian's behavior escalated to the point where Ellen had to utilize tough love, sending him to a local youth recovery center called New Day, and eventually asking him to leave her home. It was during his time at the recovery center that 19-year-old Brian met 21-year-old Kathleen Kit Nielsen. The two young individuals bonded over shared feelings of alienation and resentment toward their families. Brian harbored a deep bitterness toward his mother, claiming that she had adopted him merely as a status symbol and had made his life miserable. Kathleen, who also carried significant personal trauma, quickly became Brian's closest confidant. They eventually married, though investigators would later discover that their union was largely a marriage of convenience, designed to secure government benefits, food stamps, and health insurance. Despite finding a partner, Brian's destructive path did not change. On March 25, 2009, he was arrested for a severe domestic violence incident involving his mother. During a confrontation, he had threatened Ellen with a knife, leading her to call the police. Brian was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and sentenced to a year of probation. The situation deteriorated further when, on April 26, 2009, Ellen discovered unauthorized transactions on her bank account and realized her debit card was missing. Upon searching her home, she also discovered that several valuable jewelry pieces, including 2 diamond rings and 3 necklaces, had vanished. Suspecting her son, Ellen contacted the bank and discovered the stolen card had been used at a local Walmart, a tobacco shop, and a 7-Eleven. She even called the tobacco shop herself, where an employee described Brian, and noted that he had claimed his mother gave him permission to use the card. Ellen filed a police report regarding the theft, which took place just 4 days before she vanished. This timeline immediately made Brian the primary suspect in her disappearance. However, when detectives contacted his probation officer, they discovered a crucial detail that disrupted their initial theory. On May 1, 2009, Brian had failed a drug test, resulting in a probation violation. His probation officer had immediately revoked his probation, and Brian was taken into custody at the Metropolitan Detention Center. Because he was locked inside a jail cell from May 1st onward, it was physically impossible for him to have directly abducted or harmed his mother. When she went missing a few days later, the investigation took a significant turn on May 10, 2009, when a citizen reported an abandoned vehicle in the International District of Albuquerque. The vehicle matched the description of Ellen's missing 2007 Dodge Caravan. When officers arrived, they noticed that the license plate on the vehicle did not match her registration, but a check of the vehicle identification number confirmed it was indeed Ellen's minivan. The location was highly suspicious, as Ellen was a creature of habit who rarely ventured into that part of town. Furthermore, the interior and exterior of the vehicle appeared to have been thoroughly and freshly wiped, clean of any fingerprints or physical evidence. This discovery prompted the Albuquerque Police Department to officially reclassify the missing persons case as a homicide investigation on May 11, 2009. Detectives realized that even though Brian was incarcerated, he could have orchestrated the crime from behind bars or worked with an accomplice. They visited Brian at the detention center, where he appeared cooperative and expressed concern for his mother. He suggested that she might have had another accident, recounting the story of her falling out of bed on the night of April 25th. He claimed that he and Kathleen had gone to her house to clean up the blood, and that Ellen had willingly given them her debit card as a gesture of gratitude. Later that same afternoon, detectives interviewed Cathleen. She echoed Brian's story, claiming that the theft report was simply a power play by Ellen to maintain control over her son. Cathleen claimed she had last spoken to Ellen on May 1st, during a tense phone call where Ellen accused her of stealing the jewelry. While Cathleen appeared cooperative and even allowed officers to search her apartment, where nothing was found, detectives remained skeptical. They decided to review the recordings of Brian's phone calls from the detention center. A call from May 1st, the day of his arrest, immediately caught their attention. In the recording, Brian instructed Cathleen to quickly remove all stolen items, including the credit cards, from their apartment. Cathleen responded that she was already on it, explaining she was at the home of a woman named Bella. When Brian asked her to tell Bella that he loved her, detectives were highly intrigued. Confronted with this recording on May 28, Cathleen confessed that she had lied about the credit cards being a gift. She also revealed that she and Brian were in an open, polyamorous relationship. Bella Gonzalez was actually Brian's girlfriend. And Cathleen admitted that her relationship with Ellen was largely based on financial exploitation, as they routinely relied on the schoolteacher for money. Despite these revelations, the police did not have enough evidence to make an arrest for murder, and they chose to monitor Cathleen, hoping she would lead them to Ellen. The breakthrough in the case did not come from surveillance, however, but from an unexpected source on September 1st, 2009. An anonymous informant walked into the Edgewood Police Department, claiming to have crucial information about the missing schoolteacher. The informant stated that a young man named Christopher Donovan had confessed to his involvement in the crime, revealing that a man named James Johnson had strangled Ellen to death. Detectives immediately investigated the connections and discovered that James Johnson was actually Cathleen's boyfriend, a detail she had conveniently omitted during her discussions of her polyamorous marriage. Christopher Donovan was an active-duty airman stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base and was James Johnson's roommate. When brought in for questioning, Christopher confessed to his role in the conspiracy. He explained that he had acted as the driver, transporting Cathleen and James to Ellen's home. Cathleen had used a garage door opener provided by Ellen to gain entry. She and James waited in the garage for Ellen to prepare for work. When Ellen stepped into the garage, James ambushed her and ended her life. They then wrapped her body, placed it in her minivan, and enlisted Christopher's help to transport her to a remote, pre-dug grave site in the Jemez Mountains. Christopher agreed to cooperate with the police by making recorded phone calls to Cathleen and James. During these calls, he expressed panic about the police being on his trail. Cathleen warned him to remain silent, while James made incriminating statements about the body remaining hidden in the mountains. Armed with this evidence, police arrested James Johnson on September 24th and Cathleen the following day. Recognizing the strength of the case against her, Cathleen eventually chose to cooperate, leading detectives deep into the Jemez Mountains, where they recovered Ellen's body, wrapped in a blue tarp, from a shallow grave. In the legal proceedings that followed, the conspirators were brought to justice. Christopher Donovan pled guilty to second-degree homicide and received a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper with capite hot evidence, resulting in a 28-year prison sentence. Cathleen Roth, identified as the mastermind who orchestrated the entire plot out of resentment and greed, pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. She was sentenced to 37.5 years in prison. Brian Roth was not charged in connection with the homicide, as evidence showed he was entirely unaware of the plot while incarcerated. Analyzing this tragic case reveals a complex web of psychological, social, and financial motives. At its core, the primary motive was financial greed combined with a toxic sense of entitlement. Cathleen and her associates viewed Ellen not as a caring mother or a dedicated educator, but merely as a source of revenue and a persistent nuisance. When Ellen attempted to establish boundaries by involving law enforcement in the theft of her credit cards and jewelry, the perpetrators experienced a volatile mixture of anger and panic. Cathleen, driven by a desire to avenge her husband's arrest and secure undisputed access to Ellen's assets, manipulated those around her to execute a calculated plan. This case illustrates a tragic pattern seen in many domestic crimes, where long-standing enabling behaviors suddenly transition into extreme violence when the victim attempts to reclaim control. The frequency of such tragic cases often stems from the vulnerability of isolated individuals who harbor deep affection for troubled family members. Parents, particularly singles parents, who have invested their lives into raising their children, frequently struggle to establish firm boundaries. This can create an environment where abusive behavior is tolerated or minimized until it reaches a dangerous threshold. Additionally, the intersection of substance abuse, antisocial personalities, and financial desperation often creates a highly volatile environment where individuals feel justified in committing heinous acts for relatively minor material gains. In tracking down the perpetrators, the Albuquerque Police Department relied on several critical clues and investigative techniques. First, the disruption of Ellen's meticulous daily routine immediately signaled that she had not left voluntarily. Second, the careful analysis of the physical scene, particularly the unusually prepared dog food bowl, provided a clear indication that someone else had staged the environment. Third, digital forensics, specifically the systematic review of recorded jailhouse phone calls, allowed detectives to bypass the deceptive narratives presented by the suspects. Finally, the reliance on community information and the eventual cooperation of co-conspirators proved essential in breaking the wall of silence. Despite the criminals' attempts at sophistication, such as wiping down the minivan, replacing its license plate, and staging an alibi through Brian's incarceration, their plan was fundamentally flawed. Their pseudo-sophistication was quickly undermined by their own greed, poor communication, and the psychological burden of their actions, which eventually led to the confession that broke the case open. This contrast highlights a common reality in criminal investigations, where the illusion of a perfect crime is easily shattered by disciplined, methodical police work. Several profound life lessons can be drawn from this tragedy to help prevent similar occurrences in the community. It is vital for families to recognize the early warning signs of domestic abuse and financial exploitation, even when committed by one's own children. Establishing healthy, firm boundaries and seeking external intervention from counseling services, social workers, or law enforcement is not a betrayal of love, but a necessary step to ensure the safety of everyone involved. Furthermore, neighborly vigilance and workplace community networks, like the quick action taken by Cathleen Roth, are invaluable tools in ensuring that vulnerable individuals are not left isolated in times of crisis. To accelerate the apprehension of perpetrators in complex cases, law enforcement agencies can continue to enhance interagency communication and leverage real-time digital tracking. By utilizing advanced database sharing and maintaining rigorous protocols for analyzing communication records early in an investigation, police can identify connections between suspects much faster. Educating the public on how to report suspicious behavior without fear of retaliation also remains a cornerstone of effective community policing. Through the tireless efforts of the investigating forces, justice was ultimately served for Ellen Roth, ensuring that her memory continues to be honored by her family, her former students, and the community she served so selflessly. The complexities of human relationships often reveal a profound contrast between unconditional devotion and calculated exploitation, a dynamic that lies at the heart of many tragic criminal investigations. When analyzing the psychological underpinnings of familial crimes, one often observes a devastating pattern where boundless maternal affection is met not with gratitude, but with an escalating sense of unearned entitlement. Such tragedies do not occur in a vacuum. Rather, they are the culmination of unresolved domestic turmoil, substance abuse, and personality dynamics that strip away the natural bonds of empathy. In many modern communities, cases of financial exploitation and domestic abuse within families occur with hot, alarming frequency because of a toxic mix of emotional manipulation and enabling behaviors. Parents, driven by a deep desire to protect and nurture their children, frequently find themselves trapped in cycles of forgiveness, overlooking serious warning signs under the assumption that love and patience will eventually heal behavioral wounds. Unfortunately, when individuals with antisocial tendencies perceive this endless grace as a weakness to be exploited, the risk of escalation grows exponentially. This specific vulnerability is often compounded by a lack of community awareness regarding the subtle signs of domestic violence perpetrated by adult children against their parents, a silent epidemic that remains underreported due to shame and maternal guilt. Understanding these dynamics requires a close examination of the life of Ellen Feeder Roth, whose journey stands as a testament to dedication, professional excellence, and a tragic vulnerability to the very person she sought to lift up. Ellen was born on the 15th of April in the year 1948 to her parents Emmanuel and Judith Feeder. As the only girl among 4 siblings, Ellen grew up in a supportive household, starting her life in Miami before her family relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where her father served as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. From her early youth, Ellen exhibited an insatiable appetite for education and a natural affinity for children, which guided her decision to attend the University of Miami to pursue a degree in education. After completing her undergraduate studies, she returned to her beloved Albuquerque, earning a Master's degree in bilingual education and embark on a fulfilling, decades-long teaching career. For 25 years, Ellen served as a reading specialist at Chelwood Elementary School, leaving an indelible mark on countless young minds who often returned to visit their cherished mentor long after leaving her classroom. Ellen was a woman of routine, reliable to a fault, who loved traveling the world during her summer breaks and possessed a rich, outgoing personality. Yet, her ultimate goal in life was to experience the joy of motherhood. In her 30s, Ellen met a successful attorney named Jerry Roth, and the two married in the year 1986. When biological paths to parenthood proved challenging, Ellen channeled her determination into adoption, bringing home a newborn son named Brian in the year 1990. This moment marked the pinnacle of her personal happiness. She felt complete and poured her entire soul into raising her son. However, the intense focus on her maternal role strained her marriage, leading to a divorce less than a year later. Jerry granted Ellen full custody, leaving her to raise Brian as a single mother. As Brian grew, the immense love and resources Ellen provided were met with severe behavioral issues. Despite her efforts to guide him through various challenges, Brian's behavior deteriorated as he entered his late teens, marked by a descent into substance abuse and violent outbursts. Ellen attempted to employ tough love by sending him to a recovery center known as New Day. But it was there that Brian met 21-year-old Cathleen Kit Nielsen, a fellow patient with her own history of personal struggles. The two bonded deeply over a shared sense of rejection. Though Brian chose to interpret his mother's structured parenting and financial boundaries as a form of manipulation, viewing himself as a mere accessory to her wealthy lifestyle. The toxic alliance between Brian and Cathleen escalated rapidly, resulting in Brian's arrest on the 25th of March in the year 2009, after he threatened Ellen with a knife during a domestic confrontation. Ellen, seeking to protect her safety, made the difficult choice to call the police, leading to Brian being charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and placed on probation. However, the cycle of exploitation did not end there. On the 26th of April in the year 2009, Ellen discovered unauthorized transactions on her bank account, prompting her to investigate on her own. She discovered that her debit card, along with 2 diamond rings and 3 valuable necklaces, had been taken from her home. By calling local businesses, including a tobacco shop, she confirmed that the individual using her card matched her son's description. Brian had falsely claimed to merchants that his mother had authorized the purchases. Ellen filed a formal police report regarding the theft, unknowingly setting off a sequence of events among those who viewed her financial assets as their personal inheritance, and her very existence as an obstacle to their desires. The tension reached a quiet, ominous peak on the 4th of May in the year 2009. In a quiet Albuquerque neighborhood, the sudden absence of a dedicated educator immediately sparked concern. Ellen, who had never missed a day of work regardless of the weather, failed to arrive at her school for 2 consecutive days. On the 6th of May in the year 2009, her close coworker, Cathleen Roth, traveled to Ellen's residence to investigate, finding untouched newspapers stacked outside and hearing dogs barking from within. Concerned that Ellen might have suffered a medical emergency, particularly in light of a prior head injury Ellen had experienced, Cathleen contacted the Albuquerque Police Department to request a welfare check. Upon arriving, officers made the decision to force entry into the home. Inside, the residence was orderly, showing no signs of a struggle or forced entry. However, the officers discovered Ellen's 2 beloved dogs barricaded in a room with an exceptionally large overflowing bowl of food and water. To an outsider, this might have seemed like a gesture of care, but to those who knew Ellen's meticulous nature, it was an immediate red flag. The overfilled bowl suggested that someone had prepared for the dogs to survive for several days in her absence, a detail that strongly indicated an organized and planned departure rather than a sudden accident or a voluntary trip. As detectives initiated a missing persons investigation, they quickly learned from Ellen's brother, John Feeder, that her 2007 Dodge Caravan was missing from the property. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the police entered the vehicle's details into the National Crime Information Center database. The immediate suspect in everyone's mind was Brian, given his history of domestic violence and the outstanding theft report Ellen had filed the USA Today's prior. However, when investigators contacted Brian S. probation officer, they discovered a crucial detail that seemed to clear him of direct physical involvement. Brian had been arrested on the 1st of May in the year 2009 for a probation violation after testing positive for narcotics and had remained in custody ever since. With the primary suspect behind bars during the window of her disappearance, detectives had to re-evaluate their timeline, realizing that while Brian could not have physically committed the act, the complexity of his social circle warranted a deeper investigation. A significant breakthrough occurred on the 10th of May in the year 2009, when a caller reported an abandoned vehicle parked in the International District of Albuquerque, an area entirely inconsistent with Ellen S. routine. Upon arriving at the scene, officers confirmed that the vehicle was indeed Ellen S. missing 2007 Dodge Caravan. Although the license plate on the back did not match, the vehicle identification number confirmed its origin. Upon closer inspection, detectives noted that the interior of the minivan had been meticulously wiped clean of fingerprints, DNA, and trace evidence. The intentional removal of biological markers and the altered license plate transformed the missing persons case into an active homicide investigation on the 11th of May in the year 2009. It was clear that the individuals responsible possessed a deliberate focus on evading law enforcement, though their efforts to cover their tracks ultimately left a trail of logical inconsistencies. To unravel this mystery, detectives conducted structured interviews, beginning with Brian at the detention center and subsequently bringing in his wife, Cathleen. During her initial interview, Cathleen presented herself as a deeply concerned family member, describing Ellen's strictness and suggesting that the missing credit card report was merely a dramatic attempt by Ellen to exert control over Brian. She claimed that the financial issues had been resolved and that Ellen had willingly gifted them jewelry. However, investigators quickly began to spot inconsistencies in her narrative. To verify her claims, detectives initiated a comprehensive review of the recorded telephone calls Brian made from jail. A call placed on the 1st of May revealed a telling conversation. Brian instructed Cathleen to remove all stolen items, including the credit cards, from their apartment, to which Cathleen responded that she was already on the task. This conversation explained why a subsequent search of their apartment yielded no physical evidence of the theft, while simultaneously exposing Kathleen's willingness to obstruct justice. Furthermore, the jailhouse recordings introduced an unexpected individual into the investigation. During the call, Cathleen mentioned she was staying at the home of a woman named Bella, and Brian asked Cathleen to convey his love to her. When detectives confronted Cathleen with this recording during a follow-up interview on the 28th of May, the complex reality of their living situation emerged. Cathleen admitted that she and Brian were in a non-traditional polyamorous relationship and that Bella Gonzalez was actually Brian's girlfriend. She explained that her marriage to Brian was largely an arrangement of convenience to secure government assistance and insurance, while their relationship with Ellen was motivated almost entirely by financial exploitation. Cathleen admitted to stealing the credit card, contradicting her earlier statements, yet she maintained absolute ignorance regarding Ellen's whereabouts. The investigation entered a period of quiet observation as detectives sought to gather concrete evidence without alerting the suspects. The critical resolution arrived 4 months later, on the 1st of September in the year 2009, when an anonymous informant walked into the Edgewood Police Department. The informant revealed that a young man named Christopher Donovan, an airman stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base, had confessed to being involved in the disappearance of the Albuquerque teacher. According to the informant, Christopher claimed that a man named James Johnson had physically ended Ellen S.'s life and that James was actually Kathleen S.'s boyfriend. This revelation exposed yet another layer of the polyamorous network, one that Kathleen had deliberately concealed during her interviews. Detectives immediately brought Christopher Donovan in for questioning. Confronted with the details of the confession, Christopher chose to cooperate, detailing a chilling conspiracy born of resentment and greed. He revealed that Kathleen, furious over Brian S.'s arrest and blaming Ellen for his incarceration, had masterminded a plan to permanently eliminate her mother-in-law. Kathleen had used a garage door opener provided by Ellen to gain access to the property. On the morning of the murder, Kathleen and James Johnson waited inside the garage. As Ellen prepared to leave for school, they confronted her, and James committed the physical act that ended her life. Christopher, acting as the driver, arrived shortly after to assist in moving her body. They transported her to a remote, high-altitude forested area in the Jemez Mountains, where they placed her in a pre-dug grave. Christopher admitted that Kathleen felt a sense of pride in the act, viewing it as a triumphant resolution to her perceived grievances, showing a complete lack of remorse for the woman who had spent years supporting her husband. Hoping to secure mitigating circumstances for his own charges, Christopher agreed to assist detectives by making recorded telephone calls to James and Kathleen. During these conversations, Christopher expressed panic, claiming that the police were closing in on him. Kathleen instructed him to remain silent, while James made incriminating statements regarding the location of the burial site and the environmental conditions that might affect the recovery of evidence. These recorded admissions provided the necessary probable cause for prosecutors to secure arrest warrants. James Johnson was taken into custody on the 24th of September in the year 2009, and Kathleen was arrested the following day. Despite the arrests, prosecutors faced a significant legal challenge: convicting the perpetrators of murder without locating the victim's physical remains. Kathleen and James initially exercised their right to remain silent, refusing to cooperate with search efforts. However, a breakthrough occurred when detectives interviewed Brian S.'s girlfriend, Bella Gonzalez. Bella described Kathleen S.'s extreme rage following Brian S.'s arrest, explaining that Kathleen felt Ellen was intentionally dismantling her family. She portrayed Kathleen as the manipulative mastermind who had orchestrated the entire plot to avenge her husband's arrest and secure financial freedom, drawing others into her scheme to fulfill her personal agenda. Facing the strength of the state's mounting evidence and the testimony of her associates, Kathleen ultimately chose to cooperate, agreeing to lead investigators to the burial site in exchange for a plea agreement. A caravan of detectives traveled into the dense forests of the Jemez Mountains, guided by Kathleen to a remote location. There, under approximately 2 feet of earth, investigators located a blue tarp containing the remains of Ellen Roth. The recovery of her body, confirmed by the Office of the Medical Investigator, provided the definitive forensic evidence required to close the case. The legal proceedings concluded with substantial prison sentences for the co-conspirators. Christopher Donovan pled guilty to second-degree homicide and received a 15-year prison sentence. James Johnson entered a plea deal for second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper vikep ita hot evidence, resulting in a sentence of 28 years in prison. Cathleen Roth, recognized as the coordinator of the conspiracy, pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and conspiracy to tamper vikep tehat evidence, receiving a sentence of 37.5 years in prison. Bella Gonzalez also faced legal consequences, pleading guilty to her role in hiding the victim's body prior to its burial. Brian Roth, being incarcerated at the time of the physical act, was not charged in connection with the homicide, as investigators determined he was unaware of the active plot. The tragic loss of Ellen Roth offers profound lessons for families and law enforcement agencies alike. From a community perspective, this case underscores the critical importance of recognizing the warning signs of familial abuse and taking decisive steps to protect vulnerable individuals. When a family member exhibits a history of violent behavior, threat of force, or financial exploitation, it is vital to establish firm legal and physical boundaries, rather than relying solely on patience or enabling assistance. Law enforcement and social service agencies can prevent similar outcomes by implementing comprehensive support systems for parents facing domestic violence from adult children, ensuring that protective orders are strictly enforced and accompanied by safety planning. For investigative forces, the rapid resolution of complex cases relies heavily on the meticulous analysis of behavioral anomalies and immediate physical clues. In this investigation, the simple detail of the overfilled dog food bowls served as the initial catalyst that prevented detectives from dismissing the case as a voluntary disappearance. Additionally, the proactive monitoring of detention facility communications proved to be an invaluable investigative tool, exposing the subversion of justice and revealing the true relationships among the co-conspirators. By combining traditional forensic analysis vikepte, hot digital footprint tracking, and strategic community outreach, law enforcement can dismantle complex criminal conspiracies much faster, ensuring that those who attempt to exploit the innocent are swiftly brought to justice. Though Ellen's life was cut short by an act of extraordinary selfishness, her legacy as a dedicated educator, a loving sibling, and a compassionate member of her community endures. Her family continues to honor her memory, ensuring that her passion for teaching and her profound love for children are passed down to future generations, demonstrating that the light of a generous life can never be fully obscured by the actions of those who sought to extinguish it.